be like the education of Leslie.
Yeah, dunk on Leslie. Okay, it's fine.
I mean, it's real because we're obviously failing to connect with people who don't get our language.
Yeah, we're screaming a bunch of incomprehensible gibberish. Like
it's not that it's incomprehensible. They are words. I just don't know what they mean in context that come out of your mouth. I have no. Okay, I'll give an example.
Okay.
I did the show yesterday with Kennedy, Rara, Merrick, and me.
Yeah.
And everybody was guffawing about the thing that Biden supposedly mumbled under his breath.
Inshallah.
Yes, that. Right.
Oh, hell yeah.
I don't know what the hell that is.
Okay. So inshallah is like prayer. It's a prayer.
So Rachel, so while they're all like guffawing,
so why is everybody okay? So fascists hate Muslims because fascists are inherently, xenophobic, racist, and just bad speaking generally. And so one of the things the left likes to do is trigger the fash by saying inshallah, which is a Muslim prayer that basically means like God willing, right? So like if God wills it, this thing will happen, right? You can also say mashallah, which is like saying thank God, right? The idea is like, it's all very focused around Allah because that's like the creator and everything. And that's like your central God. And in the same way that like, our culture might say like Jesus Christ as like an exclamation, like it's just baked into the culture, right? Yeah, but so like the left loves saying inshallah about things because like it makes the fash really mad, and
that makes perfect sense.
Way to do it, yeah.
See, but now I wish I had known that because they were all like so excited that Biden.
There's no way he said that.
There's no way he said it on purpose.
There's no way he said that. Yeah, it was not on purpose.
There's no way.
Maybe like some neuron in his brain misfired and he said inshallah, but it was not intentional.
No.
I mean, and another thing, if this makes you feel better, I had to look it up too to like get, and then like for me, the funniest part was like the nuance behind it, and then I guess another connotation that it sometimes has is like almost like a Southerner would say, "Bless your heart." It has a shade aspect. Where like if you're dealing with a little kid who's asking a ton of questions, and you just say "Inshallah" when it's God's will, you're basically saying. Kind of brushing them off. Yeah. So, I mean, and I don't know if all that nuance was just lost on him or not. I feel like I would have never, he used it. It was very fluid, very like he says it to his kid all the time or something. And
I have it taped because I'm a glutton for punishment. I actually watched it really stoned live. And then I rewatched it sober the next morning. Because I'm insane. But now I'm going to have to rewatch it before my show tonight at 8:30, at 8 o'clock tonight because we've been rescheduled. I'm going to have to watch it tonight to see if he actually says it or if it's just a brain fart that came out of his mouth. Because now I'm interested to know.
I mean, we can dream, right? Anyway, hello. We are 3.5 minutes into the episode. We have not introduced ourselves yet. You are watching a very special Not Safe for Wonks. Today, we are doing a telethon to benefit my very good friend, Will Harris, who will be here with us later. And with me, I have Mike Shipley, chair of the Libertarian Socialist Caucus of the Libertarian Party, and Leslie, who you all know and love from her many appearances across Not Safe for Wonks and her amazing podcast, Into the Abyss. Hi, everybody. Oh, and I'm Rachel. Everybody knows Rachel. I'm here every Friday.
Everybody knows and loves Rachel.
Yay. It's good to be back. Thanks for putting this all together. And
yeah. Of course. I mean, I am very, very excited about Will running for office. He is truly, when I say one of my oldest friends, like he is one of the people who radicalized me into becoming a socialist in the first place. And he came from a very conservative Christian background. So he is incredibly good at like communicating these ideas to people who are like, Southern and kind of more on the conservative side and who've like never really thought about what capitalism is and does. And it's kind of uniquely useful in this culture here. The kinds of arguments you hear made here are not necessarily the ones you're going to hear, up in, I don't know, Manchester, right? Like,
no, not at all.
Yeah, right. It's a fundamentally different culture, and the complaints and the objections people have are actually pretty different here. One thing in particular that's very interesting about the South is that we are collectivist, or more collectivist actually than the rest of the country. And so even though we have this sort of reputation in the South of being so individualistic and so anti-government, it's because we actually have this deeper belief that community should be the locus of mutual aid, of support for each other, and like really of governance in its own right. And I can kind of see how that relates really well. Like, Mike, I'm sure you can sort of elucidate this, but like, it is not necessary that socialism cannot also be, libertarian or anarchist.
Well, absolutely not. And actually, on the subject of using a bunch of jargon like quick in a row,
yeah.
If you trace out like the intellectual roots of what became modern libertarianism, it actually traces through all those same 19th century thinkers, including Karl Marx, that are now associated with socialism. And of course, socialism has, various strains and tendencies, and libertarian socialism is just one of them. But actually, what modern libertarians don't like to really know, but they've been getting told lately, is that libertarianism used to just be libertarian. Like in the rest of the world, what we call libertarian socialism here is just libertarian, because we now have to put the word libertarian socialism on it as an adjective to distinguish it from the modern capitalist variety that is now, going on TV and claiming that liberty means, a border wall is just like your front door kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's pretty fair. And I think that it definitely has been co-opted. I think there's something to be said for the way that, generally speaking, the powers that be will steal our language. Actually, can I pick on you, Leslie? But not in like a condescending or shitty way. But like,
you can pick on me any way you want. I have no shame. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, no. So like, you're talking about like, we use all this jargon and there are all these concepts that are sort of unfamiliar to you. And so I'm curious, like, where you're coming from, like, if we're assuming that there are other people who are watching this that could also like have some of their questions answered, like what do you know about libertarian socialism, generally speaking, or like what is your impression of it?
I don't necessarily understand all the nuances and all the different pockets of the left. Mm-hmm. I latched onto, and I will say it this way, I latched onto democratic socialism because mm-hmm. of Bernie Sanders. I pretty much agree with him policy-wise on just about everything. There's a couple of things that I didn't agree with him on. I cannot tell you off the top of my head now, since mm-hmm. We haven't been dealing with him for so long. Past that, things are just concepts that I sort of get. Mm-hmm. And when people are talking, I can figure out what you're talking about. But the differences between like communism and Marxism, have I ever like tried to figure? No, because honestly, it doesn't matter to me. It really doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think I may be on the wrong channel to say this, but for most people, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Our lives aren't affected by whatever the hell it's called. We just need certain policies to be enacted that aren't. That's pretty much where I'm at.
Mm-hmm. So I think maybe.
But don't you understand how every tiny little nuance matters so much? We need a special word to signal that.
Yes, right. Well, I mean, there's something to be said for the left being really fractional, which is a huge problem, actually. We keep eating ourselves, and it's bad for everybody. But it also speaks to me of, like, we need to sell why socialism is worth knowing about in the first place at all, right? And I think that's probably something we're really failing at. I could see, like, for most people, it's like, what is this going to do for me?
Well, put it this way. I'm not as entrenched as you guys are, like I said, mm-hmm. but I've still had to tell people that they're using socialist programs because they don't know that. Like people in my life, that don't know certain things or socialist programs like the police department, the fire department, public schools, you know, things of that nature, don't even realize that the things that they think that they're fighting against are things that they actually use and they don't know. I mean, that's literally how inept most people are when it comes to politics. You guys are a special breed, and I hope that, and I see it so often with younger millennials, not so much older millennials, because my husband's an older millennial at 37, but I see it with younger millennials and Zoomers or Gen Zers or however the hell you want to put them. I see that coming from you guys. Gen Xers like me, and then boomers and above. We're past all that shit. We really are, for the most part.
Well, if I could just maybe plant a seed, the people that actually control the system and make our lives worse every single day are playing on a battlefield of the mind, and they do know how threatening the ideas are to them.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I'm not talking about the powers that be. I'm just talking about like everyday, average Joes,
like normal
my next door neighbor. You know, the people across the street. That's who I'm talking about. People who don't watch the news every day. People who don't, you know, don't look for news every day. The people who get their news on Facebook and whatever somebody sends them or what somebody tells them. Those are the people that I'm talking about.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So my question then is, you know, what can we do? Because like we have this problem, right? The problem is people mostly are disconnected from politics and don't care that much. And our problem is that we need to get them to care, because we need to get people mobilized against these things. And without, you know, the consent of the people, without the majority on our side, we're not going to be able to make it happen.
Right.
So the question is, like, if step one is to get people to care, like, where do we even start?
You got to go to where they are. And, you know, you can make fun of Gen Xers and boomers all you want, but they're not on Twitter the way that you guys are. We're on Facebook.
Yeah, well, and I'm on Facebook too, because I'm in that millennial space where I actually hang out with some like Gen X people on a regular basis. But
so we're on Facebook, and we're more of a word of mouth generation than actually look shit up generation. I'll be quite honest. Gen Xers, we're lazy as fuck.
I don't want to say yes, because I don't want to be like, I don't want to do generational warfare here.
I can do it. Like, okay, I can diss my people, and my people. Okay, so are we not? We're lazy. We're the apathetic generation for the most part. Not all of us, but for the most part, we're lazy.
From an outside perspective, it seems more like Gen X is kind of like a middle child generation.
We have Jan Brady syndrome.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I want you, or it's like, I don't care if you notice how much I don't care about what you think of what I care about. You know what I mean? It's like this very, like, I need to aggressively confirm that you know that I don't care because I don't care so much. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, that was part of the aesthetic of our youth culture as well, though.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to like throw shade, because like cohort stuff happens. Like, I get it. You're a product of your culture and stuff. Like, no shade, but that's like
I can throw shade at me and mine all day long. We have Jan Brady middle child syndrome hardcore. I mean hardcore. Boomers are Marsha, and anything younger than that is Cindy. And we're seriously, and if think about this, we talked about this once before. Whenever you see polls, they talk about boomers. They talk about millennials, and now they're adding Zoomers, but they completely forget about us. Like we don't exist.
That is true. And it's kind of sad, because I think our generation was cool. We lived through, like we got to witness the 80s, you know, as younger children. And we came of age to things like, you know, Kurt Cobain and, you know, Madonna kissing a woman for the first time, or whoever it was, Ellen or whoever it was, I forget. But like it was a big deal. It was a really cool culture. The fall of the wall.
I think of us more like, okay, Boomers are like the first child that everybody doted on. Gen Xers are the child, we're the oops that everybody just kind of goes, you know what, they'll figure it out for themselves. And as long as they don't stick their finger in an electric socket, we don't really need to pay attention to them. And then millennials and Zoomers are that oops baby when you thought you could never have a baby again and you're really excited that you got one. That's how I feel about it.
Like the hopeful.
Pay attention because we're cool.
We are cool, but we had to become cool on our own.
You know what I will say, honestly, though, is like there is a large contingent of Gen X who have like fully put their weight behind millennials. Because I think we can all agree millennials are like leading the charge on this one. And Zoomers as well. But like Gen X has definitely meaningfully thrown in with us.
Yes, well, what I find really funny is, and I'm constantly correcting this. Like I constantly correct when people call me a boomer. I'm not a boomer. I'm a Gen Xer. But I'm constantly correcting that Gen Xers and boomers think anybody younger than me are all millennials.
Yeah.
And they think millennials are children. And it's like, no.
I'm in my 30s.
My husband's 37. He's a millennial. Those aren't children anymore.
I have a kid. Right. Like not even like a baby, a kid. Like yeah, well, I mean, I think that sort of infantilization is a huge part of it, you know, like it delegitimizes our complaints, right? And it's something that I think boomers in particular very, very badly do generally. Like boomers love gaslighting.
They're very dismissive. They're very dismissive.
Yes, they really, really are. They are just a fundamentally like dismissive generation.
And you know, I will call myself out again. I used to be that.
Mm-hmm.
I did. I used to be that. When I was in my 40s, I used to say, I don't argue with children, and children are anybody under 30.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean,
suddenly
the children were over the age of 30 and saying the same things. And it was like, oh.
But now that I've gotten even older, I'm like, okay, you know what? Boomers are now turning into what we used to think of as grandpas and grandmas. And I don't mean that because I'm old enough to be a grandparent. What I'm saying about that is I'm talking about mentally where they're stuck and they refuse to learn anything new. And I'm still struggling with that. You guys make fun of me all the time, but I'm still struggling with that, but I'm at least trying.
You know, it's just now that it's making me think that like it's almost like the intergenerational sort of like that narrative is being used as like a proxy front for the class war. Because if you think about it, it's the older generation that holds that institutional power and they're wielding it over the younger ones.
Well, I was just going to bring that up because boomers are the last generation that all of them, for the most part, got the American dream. Gen Xers is when it started to fall apart. Millennials are getting like the deep end of the shit, and Gen Zers are just fucked.
Yeah, for a minute, this is like a true, like harsh self-evaluation moment, right? For a minute, I was very resentful of Zoomers because it seemed like for a second they might actually be better off in the job market than we were. And I was genuinely like frightened and resentful, like, oh God, if they're okay, no one's ever going to believe it's not millennials' fault, right? And then, I guess like, be careful what you wish for. The entire economy just imploded and now everyone's screwed. Like
exactly
in unprecedented rates of screwed. So I'm sorry, Gen Z, that I like put this curse on you. I didn't know.
But to bring that point to bring all of that back home to how do you get to the people who need to? Because I think the people, I think for the most part, boomers are kind of a lost cause. I mean, you can keep like trying, but for the most part,
Joe Biden
there are still Gen Xers that can be gotten to, but you got to get to them. So, and I'm going to toot my own horn a little bit. You need to get someone like me into spaces like this so that people in Gen X see someone of their own generation interacting with millennials and interacting with Gen Zoomers, and it's not a bad thing. And at that point, I think they would be more willing to listen.
Yes.
Or I could be full of shit. I don't know.
No, I think that there's something to that. I was thinking, like, of the Gen X people I'm friends with, pretty much all of them are professors, actually. They're people who directly interact with younger people constantly. And I doubt that is like a coincidence, right? That like all of the Gen X people I am genuinely emotionally close to are teachers. Like, because they probably are more able to see me, you know, as a person, as an adult, you know, and I am more able to relate to them because they speak the same language more so, you know. Makes sense.
I totally get that.
Makes sense. And I think there's something to be said for, you know, intergenerational spaces. They matter, you know, like there are things that people have done before that we don't need to try again, and there are things that haven't been thought of before that we should try, and putting our heads together is always better towards finding those solutions and towards exploring those spaces than trying to do it independently or even worse against each other.
Well, and I see you guys being more like the younger generations in the 60s that I wish that I was. You know, I'm too young for that. I saw it. I was a little child. You know, I was born when Woodstock happened, but I was 2. So, you know, I saw flower children in the park in Manhattan when I was a baby, you know, when I was 2 and 3 and 4 before we moved. But I was a child. So I saw that growing up, and I always wished that I was in the midst of all that. And I feel like I feel what you felt about Zoomers, about you guys and Gen Zers, about this is your moment, man. You guys can actually do something. You know, I've been to a march, but I would have been in the thick of things if I was younger. I can't. Now I'm in my 50s. I've got polyarthritis. I can't run. If somebody throws a projectile at me, I'm just gonna have to lay down because I can't run.
I relate to that actually, because I have this genetic disorder that makes my joints more vulnerable to fracture or to a dislocation.
Okay.
Which like is up to and including like, you know, I'm slightly more likely to like internally decapitate if the cops like baton me in the back of the head. So it's like my chance of dying if I go to these protests is higher, like a lot. And I'm having to like really think about that now. Like, okay, like if I go to this protest and die, who's going to take care of my kid? You know?
Yeah. So
it's weird. It's weird how you age out of being able to be on the front lines like that, but it does happen. Like,
no, it absolutely does. And you know, Mike, you don't know this about me, but I'm sporting a broken shoulder from a cop right now from 2 years ago.
Wow.
And I can't get any help. So, you know, I have to think about the fact that I'm already injured. I can't put myself on the front lines like that, even though my whole life I always wished I could. So I am a little jealous that you guys are getting to fight the battle. When I say you guys, millennials and Gen Zers are getting to fight a battle that has needed to be fought because it was never over. And that's the other thing that I think Gen Xers, we coasted on thinking that everything was okay. There was racism, there was sexism, but we didn't get the giant brunt of it that the older generations got. Things had pretty much died down to a lull. There were still police shootings and things like that happening, but it wasn't in our face. And maybe that's because we didn't have the internet yet. Maybe that's why.
I think it's a big part of it. Yeah. The internet, I think, has had a huge impact on politics, and especially on radical politics on both sides of the sort of right-left divide.
And we were losing things like civics class. Like I had civics class in junior high. We did not have it in high school. We had American history, but we didn't have a government or a civics type class at all in high school. Nothing. Right. Everything that I know politically after junior high, I learned on my own. Yeah. So that's the other problem in trying to reach an entire generation that wasn't taught anything.
I mean, yeah. Well, and it's kind of, I feel like it has been beneficial in some ways and harmful in others, right? Because with the sort of rise of the internet, there has been this leveling of ability to distribute information at first, right? And then it kind of got co-opted by, you know, these more powerful agents, you know, like the Facebooks and the Twitters and the, you know, Instagrams, which is just Facebook. Like these sort of institutions developed inside of the internet and shut it back down again. But for a brief period of time, there was this sort of genuine like sharing of the internet. And it actually, I think, probably peaked when I was a teen in terms of like maximum noise to minimum control. Does that make sense? And then ever since then, we've sort of been sequestering again. And it's created these really strange echo chambers, you know, that have their own problems, that have made it easier to spread disinformation, that have created, you know, the anti-vaxxer movement, that have, you know, because in so many cases, the internet was instrumental in meaningfully exposing corruption or bias or, you know, atrocity, has also made people distrust the system to the point where they kind of will believe anything. You know, and I mean, like this year, like there's people who are saying, you know, that Donald Trump doesn't actually have COVID and it's a hoax. And honestly, that could be true. I don't know. This year has surprised me every other possible way. Like,
no, I totally agree with you. I mean, right now we need to find a way. Like I said, there are certain people that are just a lost cause, and there's no sense in beating yourself up or beating your head against a wall, you know, talking to a brick wall. There's no sense. But there are people who do want to know. There are people who are willing and open to learning new things. We just got to figure out how to get to those people.
Yeah,
that's what we have to do.
Well, and I know that's a big thing that Mike does a lot of in the Libertarian Socialist Caucus. So I'm going to give Mike the floor here and talk a little bit about, you know, what sort of strategies are you using with people in the Libertarian Party, or like by age group, or, you know, when you're trying to sell it, like what's working for you?
Well, something I was thinking about when I was listening to you both speak is the way that the algorithms came, and it started being like, in order to improve how enjoyable their platforms were, they were trying to figure out how to show us content that was interesting to us. And then that kind of spiraled because if you're, you know, starting to explore new ideas, but there's like a really like outrageous idea just on the other side of it, the algorithm will suddenly scoop that in front of you. And I'm not sure where I'm going. So just let me do stream of consciousness for a second.
Okay.
My political awakening, and one way I really relate to millennials is on technology. So the internet was new when I graduated high school in 1993. I remember getting on and like literally you had to type, the link would be in bold. There were no pictures. You would type the word and that was how you followed a link. And then it would come up with a new page, you know, and it started growing from there. I probably went way too far back, but just roll with it.
Okay, really far back. You're ready
to do that. Okay. But I didn't start to have a political awakening until after 9/11. And Leslie kind of touched on the way we grew up in this. It was peacetime. We were all prosperous. It was all pop culture and alternative rock. And like politics were just, we didn't have to worry about that. And then 9/11 happened. I was like, oh my gosh, there are people that want to kill us. Why? You know? So fast forward some more because the internet's happening really fast now. And I ended up getting swept up in this kind of like Alex Jones, Ron Paul moment that happened in 2008. This was on my journey of discovery. And I'm just reforming here because you asked how we reach them and whether there are people that are like redeemable is my point, or that they can be reached. Because what I now know is that like there's like an anti-Semitic point of no return. I don't know if you saw that, like Zoom. There's this TikTok that's going around, and this chick literally created like a categorization system for conspiracy theories. And like she has it all charted out, but like again,
like how bonkers you have to be to buy it, basically.
Yeah.
Or, okay.
There's like a certain point where like those theories are like interconnected and they have a historical reference to, literal Nazi conspiracy theories. But I didn't know that. I was just questioning the world around me. And my point is like, once you go, like there's an anti-authoritarian like impulse in questioning everything. Mm-hmm. Which is different from a contrarian impulse, and that can be difficult to tease out. But I think there's some fertile ground there, is my point, because what ended up happening to me anyway, as a person who was drawn, and I started as like a mainstream liberal, and then I like swooped through this sort of Ron Paul, sort of where like that revolutionary liberal spirit became constitutionalism. So like I was hearing that in his speech, even though he was a right-wing constitutional conservative, you see, and it kind of moved me around. And then I discovered some of the older 19th century ideas that are libertarian socialism. And that really resonated with what I had always been seeking. So I think there's like, I guess there's something to be said. And here's like my point that I didn't know what I was getting at is, you know, some of these anti-vax moms that are, or whoever it is that are in this very, sort of like questioning space. Like there's a cognitive moment where some of them probably will wind up about where we are. So maybe
like they are in the sort of prime space to be radicalized.
Yes.
That part I kind of see. Yeah. And you know what? We are at 30 minutes, so I want to pull over real quick before we continue. Just remind everybody why we're here. We are currently here on an extra special double-length telethon event for William Harris, Georgia 73. He's running for the Georgia State House of Representatives, which is royally screwed, in a word or two words. It is extremely run by the GOP. It is extremely petty. It is very deliberately obstructive. It is all the problems with the sort of larger House of Representatives in the national level, in the federal government. It is bad. And my very good friend for a very long time, Will Harris, is running to represent us in it, which is pretty cool. He is a libertarian socialist, so he is not going to, you know, try and levy tons and tons of taxes on people, but he is going to do some common sense stuff, like try to legalize marijuana, like try to make it harder for big businesses like Walmart to come in and destroy small businesses, and to try and really make it better for workers here to work, to keep their money, to actually have a say in the workplace. And, you know, he is going to fight for working people tooth and nail. He's one of the most dogged people I know, to the point where I decided I was willing to spend 2 hours, you know, just sort of talking about stuff and then talking him up periodically. If you are interested in donating to his campaign, that is our big ask for the day. Signs asking what is deliberately instructive. It's obstructive, like getting in the way. If you would like to give him money, which is sort of the whole point of this, you can go to tiny.cc/NSFWill. The NSFW are, of course, uppercase, modeling the NSF wonks branding. So you can give him money at tiny.cc/NSFWill. And it'll just take you straight to his Act Blue. We're hoping we can get together like $1,000 maybe. It would be great. We'll see, you know. Fingers crossed. We raised 25 before we had even started airing. So, you know, hey, if you have a little bit of money, I know everybody's tight right now, but if you can throw some towards Will, this would go a long way towards actually increasing the power of the people in Georgia. He, in particular, is going to be one of the first millennials, definitely the only leftist millennial who makes it into power in Georgia if he wins from this election cycle. So it's extremely important. It is extremely important to prove that leftists can win elections in the South, because right now everybody thinks we're completely unwinnable, which is ridiculous. Yeah, there are a lot of really big, important reasons. Also, like, it might make it easier for women to exist here and trans people to exist here, and, like, you know, humans that aren't rich white dudes to just exist here. It would be cool. It'd be
so
nice.
Rachel, can I ask you a question going back to the labels and descriptions of things? Because sure. I've often heard, I think I know the difference, but for those who don't, I hear all the time, you can't be left and be a libertarian.
Yeah.
A libertarian is just Republican light who wants to smoke weed. So can you explain for people who don't understand the difference?
You know, I could, but I think Mike should.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. Well, that root word there, liberty, is shared by the term liberal. And basically, like, historically, it was an answer to the monarchies and the aristocracies of Europe that, you know, the king was above the people, and they were guarding wealth and power and passing it through hereditary means instead of, like, you know, answering to the people. And so liberalism, or anything having to do with that, is kind of like an anti-authoritarian impulse, is where I'm going with that. You're saying it's not okay to have this giant oppressive class of, nobles who are just extracting from the common people and living these lives of luxury while the rest of us are in squalor, right? So that's the impulse behind like what became all these different modern variations of libertarianism. And of course, one of the things that was associated with liberal revolutions was this idea that we don't need permission from the king to trade, and that markets should be free so that wealth can be shared by the people. So that free market piece got twisted into libertarian right-wing capitalism. And that's kind of how that happened. Whereas a libertarian socialist might be like, okay, so trade's a good thing to, if you choose to trade with another person, that's great. We're both better off. We don't have to like abstractify that into a giant market. But I'm giving you probably more information than you asked for. The point is the libertarian part is like anti-authoritarian. So we're looking at the ways people with money and power use money and power to abuse and guard it from us. And we're saying, no, the wealth of the land, the abundance belongs to all of us. And we need to come up with ways that we are able to share it so that systems of control don't get in the way of that and start to favor some over others.
Yes.
So
well, and I think
has so many nuances.
Right. I think one of the sort of tricks the right has used in this case is they've taken that idea of liberty, like you were saying, Mike, and they have really rewritten it to be about, I can do whatever I want, right? And like you were saying, liberty originally was this concept of being anti-authoritarian. And it wasn't self-focused in that sense. It was focused on removing one individual having a disproportionate share of power over other people, which is inherently destructive, inherently toxic. We know from tons of research, when you put people in powerful positions, they become more likely to lie, cheat, and steal. Like, they become less likely to listen to feedback. Telling people that they are an authority does bad things for people. Like, it makes them bonkers. And creating our systems in such a way that they focus around individual people having power is very, very problematic. And I'm not saying, obviously, that like we can't have representatives and stuff like that. Like, there are a lot of ways to approach this that are not just there's no government at all. But the core idea being, or the core idea of like libertarian originally was sort of about creating, an equity in terms of power. And it has become, I can do whatever I want, regardless of who I hurt. And that's not really what it was originally. And that's really just something that they have done on the right to, like, I guess, intellectualize or rationalize the atrocities that they're committing.
Right. And another thing that might help is that if you consider yourself anti-authoritarian and you're looking to the Constitution as this shining moment where like we all became free, then looking backwards to that supposedly idealized moment, it's possible for the brain to twist itself into believing that kind of conservatism is a type of libertarianism because those people were, motivated by a challenge to authority. So my point is there are seeds there that can like be nurtured. But that is very different from people like us who recognize that like the system really never was set free. And so if I'm looking toward a world where we actually get to achieve that, that's a forward thinking, a progressive idea.
Right.
So the vocabulary around those 2 points of view can sometimes seem like quite astonishingly different. And what we've learned through the Bottom Unity campaign in particular is kind of matching back up what the different people are saying and realizing that like, oh, there's like a kernel of the same page that we can be on there if we we reach for that. And so
like we have the same goal states or whatever. Yeah.
Both exciting and infuriating.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and it happens a lot on the left too, like just by itself, like between the top and bottom left, like there's a lot of conflict there. And at the end of the day, like I think we all kind of have these very compatible goals, actually. And a lot of us, I think, not just as like individuals on the left or the right or on the top or the bottom, but just sort of how we relate to the rest of the world have that tendency, to kind of assume that because they're not saying exactly the same thing we are, that they're saying something, completely different or, irreconcilable with what we're saying, what we believe, what language we use. And it's really a culture thing. Yeah.
It is. And I think another thing to remember is that the ruling class politicians benefit from sort of magnifying the idea of two sides that, they're conveniently able to tightly control the vocabulary around, and then sort of pit those against one another, which is not to say that there aren't like meaningful differences in like what motivates a person to pick one of those two sort of pre-selected sides. But it is to say that like, or just echo what I just heard you say, is that like underneath it all, like everybody just wants to live like a prosperous, peaceful life. Like we just all want what's best for ourselves, and hopefully too.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
We haven't heard from you in a minute.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I wish that everybody just wanted that mic, but this election cycle, this presidential cycle has proved that to be completely wrong. The difference to me, and maybe I'm full of it, but used to be the difference between the right and the left, at least from a everyday person's kind of stance, was money. That was really the difference. It was Republicans had money, Democrats could have money, but generally didn't. That's literally where, I mean, there was a classism, but not like now. Not only is there this classism, but now there's a whole group of MAGA people who they don't give a damn about any of that. They just want to be able to say the things that they're thinking whenever the hell that they want to say them. They're emboldened to do things that they would have, that they used to be able to do in the 40s and 50s that they haven't been able to do for so long, at least not outwardly. What's going on now? I mean, I used to have friends on both sides. I had friends who were in the Tea Party, I had two friends who were founding members of the Texas Tea Party. We used to hang out all the time. Our differences then, we could agree to disagree. You can't agree to disagree with the right anymore because they're not reasonable anymore. What's going on right now is completely different.
Yeah, well, I think it speaks to a certain kind of insecurity, right? And I think a lot of people who are in the sort of Trump cult of personality are there because they have a sort of existential dread that they are looking to see, assuaged, really. These are people, frequently evangelical people, who believe that there are forces actively trying to wipe them out of existence. These are the forces of like liberalism and people being, gay and women having sex and all of these like terrible, anti-authoritarian things that directly challenge the power hierarchy assumed within evangelical Christianity. And so those people who really are not just emotionally, but in terms of their identity attached to the idea of a patriarch and to the idea of following a person who is a powerful figure, who is a father figure, who has the ideas, the much more liberal and liberty-oriented politics of the modern era are very threatening to that, right? Because it's so hard once you see the light, so to speak, to go back and to say like, yeah, actually, I do want the authoritarianism. I do want the shame. I do want, to have these very rigid social rules. And I mean, for some people it works and that's great, but like the numbers have been dwindling because of it. And I think they feel existentially threatened in that capacity. It is also a lot of specifically like older white wealthy people who I think are likewise existentially threatened, not just by, the sort of rising tide of the proletariat, but also by this sort of broader rejection of white supremacy that we've seen recently, and of the diversification of people entering into wealth, which I mean, even then is minuscule, right? Like, it's not like there's tons and tons of, multimillionaire or billionaire Black people, right? But there are some now, and there used to be none. And I think for them, they find that threatening as well, right? They feel like their specific identity is threatened. And from that, we are seeing these sort of ethno-nationalist drives. And I think that's why they connect with Trump the way they do, right? Because they have this fear that their identity is being wiped out. And the only way to do that is to kill everybody else first.
Well, I think the great irony is that they're telling on themselves that they do understand the inherent violence and brutality of the system. And what they're really saying is they're afraid of that violence and brutality being directed at them.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I think that's very true. And I also think, that.
But I want to say the elites on the left are using those fears against the rest of us by saying, okay, if you don't vote for who we deem appropriate to vote that out, well, then you're voting for fascism.
Yeah. Right. Well, and it's disingenuous.
It is. And like, you actually hit on it, like, and I don't want to don't get this twisted and don't magnify it, because I'm only saying it's a tiny kernel, but like, the right has done a good job of twisting the elements of authoritarianism that come from the corporate. I can't even bring myself to call them the corporate left, but the corporate Democrats,
right,
moderate center right,
the sort of unquestioned tenets of capitalism, right?
The left wing of the capitalist right wing ruling class,
right?
Whatever you want to call it. They do co-opt the vocabulary of social justice and get it twisted in order to expand their own power. And that tiny kernel of truth is what the authoritarian far right is picking up on. Like, they've done a successful job. Like, how do you get it so twisted to think that like a literal handmaiden is shattering the feminist paradigm, feminist orthodoxy? So a handmaiden is now anti-authoritarianism?
Right.
Like, that is how twisted it is. But you could see the kernel in that, because you know what corporate Democrats are doing. And like, there is a kind of insidious violence in what they do with social freedom when they get a hold of it.
Right.
That's the really difficult one to unpack, and where we can find a shred of common ground.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a frequent topic, actually, that it's easier to radicalize a Republican than a Democrat, than like a hardcore Democrat, because the more hardcore Republicans at least like recognize that there's something wrong with the status quo, if not necessarily like their solution to the problem is completely different from ours, right? Their ideas, their fascist ideas, are horrendous and deplorable, and absolutely should not be given like any consideration, right? The answer is not forming a white ethno-state. That's ridiculous. But at least they recognize that there's a problem. And right now we have people like Joe Biden who are in the running against the fascists, saying nothing actually has to change. We just need to go back to the way things were immediately before we elected the fascist. And it's like, no, everything changed, dude. Everything is different now. The economy is collapsing. There's a pandemic. There's like a new, like, just civil rights movement that's currently happening. There's been riots for 100 days. Like, we've had just this incredible disruption to our entire society. And it was because before now, it wasn't working either. Like, it just collapsed because it wasn't working, And so that sort of inherent denial that there is even something wrong that needs to be fixed, I think is really an intrinsic part of the Democratic attitude at this point, or Democratic Party attitude at this point.
So my question is, how is William Harris going to fix that?
That's a good question. And, actually, we are going to have him joining us in about 10 minutes. So I'm going to hand that off to him when he gets here in more detail. But I think one of the things that Will is really, really focused on that I like about him as a person is he is very much focused on just maximizing personal empowerment. And like, he is very focused on maximizing personal impact. And I know that seems like, why are you bringing this up in this way? And I'll bring it back around, I swear. There's sort of this tension right now between people who want to change things and feel disempowered and unable against these very entrenched powers in both the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party. And you see that a lot with a lot of different third-party groups. The cool thing about Will is he's trying to do it inside the Democratic Party and like at least a little bit succeeding, right? He made it through the primaries, which is exciting, right? Because if we can prove within the Democratic Party, like, hey, we're doing this here, we, the millennials, are winning elections on this left campaign, like maybe, just maybe, we might be able to sort of assert ourselves in the Democratic Party and prove our case a little bit more, right? And I think that is one of the most important things about Will getting into office, frankly, is just sort of continuing to prove this case, like, with AOC, like with Rashida Tlaib, like with Ilhan Omar, and many other people who have recently been elected in the most recent, or who have made it through their primaries in the most recent elections. I think it is sort of making a case to these people who are very entrenched. And who need to see it before they'll really take it seriously. Does that make sense? Does that track?
Yeah, no, totally. Now, do you know, or should I wait until he's on to ask this question? Do you know, was there a specific reason why he's a libertarian and not Green Party? And is it because
Absolutely. If you ask him who his candidate for president is, it's, I believe, Howie Hawkins. Actually, okay. Yeah, he gets along well with the Green Party. And I know he and I both have some issues with the Green Party in Georgia, unfortunately, because the Georgia Green Party has some sort of work to do in terms of inclusivity, in terms of being like a safe, progressive space for marginalized people. But also, I mean, he's running as a Democratic candidate right now because, like, that's access to a ton of infrastructure, and they were willing to have him, Mm-hmm. And I think he would agree with all of us when we say that there's, like, serious problems within the Democratic Party that need addressing,
No, I would totally agree with that. I just wondered, as we're talking about trying to reach, the layman like me.
Yeah.
They're going to ask that type of question. So since he's going to be here in about 10 minutes, I need to disappear for about 10 minutes. So I'll be back.
Fabulous. All right. Well, we will see you shortly. And that just leaves us, Mike.
Yay. All right.
Yay.
The pressure of 10 minutes to fill.
I think we can do it. I think we can do
it. I know. We can each get through maybe one sentence.
When you talk for a living, it becomes sort of this almost like, it's like a sort of flow state where you attach these ideas to like a hook, and then you just sort of follow them back as far as you can and just sort of hope that you'll fill the air in a way that's semi-coherent. And it's like, okay, I can keep this going for like 3 or 5 more points. So let's go. Let's see how far I can go here.
Right. And then sometimes I notice, for me at least, like, it's like once my brain commits to like where I'm going with an idea, like there's such a sense of urgency to get all the way there.
Yeah.
And sometimes the ground between here and there is bigger than I realize.
Yeah. I struggle with that a lot as like an ADHD person. It's very hard for me to filter out like what is the most important information from what I'm trying to communicate. And so like I have to kind of just tell everybody everything and then summarize it and be like, okay, I thought the whole thing out, and here's what while I was saying it out loud, came up with to explain it to you. Like,
right.
But I mean,
Oh, I was gonna say, what's funny though is I did part of how I got this communication style is that I hosted a podcast on my own for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So believe it or not, this is the practiced, like, succinct version.
Yeah.
And I do recommend anyone listening, if you struggle with, like not being able to form your thoughts, or just maybe feeling intimidated because the thoughts feel big and you don't know how to get them out.
Yes.
Get on a podcast and talk to dead air. Just do it, or maybe if you're lucky, you'll have an audience. That can happen too.
If you talk to dead air long enough, eventually somebody pays attention, is what we've discovered.
Yeah,
no, that's not true. I say this, it takes an astonishing amount of marketing to make a podcast work, like an astonishing amount. We spend, I would say, between like me, Brandon, Kennedy, and Lau, and Ren, probably a collective 150 hours a week, like just doing like Twitter, Facebook, like YouTube, talking to people that we're trying to get on the show. Like the vast majority of this show happens behind the scenes. And I mean, you hear that with like every production and it's like, oh yeah, of course. But then like when you actually are doing it and it's like, oh, this is the part where I get to relax actually. Like this is the easy part. Talking for a long time about specific, I don't know, like theoretical concepts or whatever, minutia of leftist ideology is like actually way easier than just like churning out content every single second of the day. Asking people to come on is pretty easy too, actually. People generally want to come like be on a podcast. People like the idea of being on a podcast, which is kind of nice.
That's fun. It is fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, I think it would be great for us to take like a 5-minute break while we're waiting. One more time before we sign off for 5 minutes to like get some water and use the bathroom and stuff in the middle of our special 2-hour telethon. I want to remind everybody that we are here supporting Will Harris for Georgia 73. He is running as a Democrat, but he is personally in his ideology a libertarian socialist. Having him in office would be huge for the movement, generally speaking, especially in Georgia. It would be so incredible if we could get him in there. And one of the biggest barriers to winning an election is just having lots and lots of money. So if you happen to have a little bit of money, my child is screaming in the background. Yeah, we're live. 1 second. I have to yell at my child. Hold on. My child is 5, and 5-year-olds are very feisty, especially if you happen to be a 5-year-old who is my 5-year-old and happen to be exactly like me. So this is a live show. I have a kid. Anyway, voting for Will is good. Will also has kids, in fact, and he is here for parents. I am happy to say, he is about supporting families, and he's just a great person. So if you have a little bit of money and want to give him some so that he might be able to actually win his election, which would be awesome, please go to tiny.cc/NSFWill. The NSFW are uppercase, the rest of it is lowercase. And we will be back in like 5 minutes. Or in this case, it's going to be like more like 3 minutes now, but we'll be back soon. Bye. Hi, everybody. We're back. How exciting. So we are currently actually also navigating some technical difficulties with Will, our specialist of guests, but we're working it out. He'll be here soon. Until then, hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are doing a special double dose of Not Safe for Wonks today. It is so exciting. We're so happy to be here. This is Rachel. You know who I am because I'm here all of the time. I'm here with Leslie, who you also know because she's got her fabulous Friday podcast, live stream, whatever, Into the Abyss. And I'm here with Mike Shipley from the Libertarian Socialist Caucus of the Libertarian Party. We are excited. We are having a great Friday because Donald Trump is going to die and of his own plague that he himself spread, and that's just good. And we have awesome people here. We have a great candidate getting ready to join us in a few minutes. We are just on cloud nine. I've given my child some food, which means I've bought at least 15 minutes to not have her banging down my door again. So we're good. We're ready. We're doing this.
Fuck yeah.
Heck yeah. Also, fun fact, the reason, and this is something Will actually asked me to bring up, the reason we're having some technical difficulties with Will right now is because he is not currently in a location near broadband internet because he lives out in a rural area. He lives in Griffin, Georgia, which is a hike away from pretty much any big city. It's definitely not Atlanta. It's very much rural Georgia. And one of his big platform positions is pushing for broadband internet access in rural areas because it turns out that stuff really matters, actually. Being able to, for example, send your kids to school remotely during a giant generation-defining plague is really important, actually. Being able to access the internet is not just a luxury, it is a necessary facet of participating in the modern era. And
especially with a lot of jobs going remotely, you need the internet to have those jobs.
Yeah, internet is it is a utility. It is necessary. Everybody should have it, and just like every other utility and thing that everybody should, have and needs, it should be free.
Yeah, which most people don't realize either. I've not been on the receiving end of a lot of programs. I've been lucky most of my life, but there was a brief period where I was a single mom, and I wasn't working. And the things that you can't get help with are things, at least back when this happened to me, and this was also in Texas, you could not get help with the internet. You could get help with utilities. You could not get help if your rent or mortgage was over $1,000, which are most rents and mortgages.
Yeah.
You could not get help with toiletries, especially women. You could not get help with feminine hygiene products.
Yeah. It's like, haha, bleed on yourself. What?
Like, and weird things that you couldn't get were like, I could buy candy with my food stamps,
but not tampons.
But I couldn't buy a roasted chicken that was already cooked. You could not buy already prepared food from the deli.
I wonder if that's because the already prepared food from the deli couldn't afford lobbyists.
Maybe, I don't know, but you could buy candy, but I couldn't buy, like, if I was running late, I couldn't grab a chicken that was already cooked to give to my children.
I'm 100% certain that, like, Hershey or Mars or whoever has the resources to successfully lobby state representatives to include candy is what I'm getting at here. Like, I'm very confident that seems like something very easy to do if you're a giant multinational company, is to convince the government that that should be something that they pay for.
Well, I'm just going on a personal rant because people since then and people at the time, you're always hearing people as, well, they go out and they buy junk food. And because you were allowed to, but you're not allowed to buy certain other things that are considered good, decent food. You're not allowed. So,
like you need calories either way.
It's just something else that needs to be fixed that most people don't understand and that make me go off on tangents. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, especially people who are like in poverty, one of the most difficult things is a lot of people who are working poor, are working multiple jobs and have no time at all. And that no time at all goes really, really quick when you have to spend tons of it on food prep, or when you have to spend tons of it on childcare, or, you know, when you have to spend it sleeping, or, you know,
or driving one way an hour to work or 2 hours to work. Like in Texas,
yes.
I lived in the largest city in the world, not the country, the largest city in the world with no public transportation.
That's incredible. What city was this?
Arlington. Huh. It's where the Cowboys play.
Atlanta is very similar, actually.
It's even worse though. There are no buses, at least back then. There were no buses. There was no buses at all. And the reason being is because they didn't want the people or that element of people who would need busing to move to Arlington. So when it was proposed, it was struck down. And that was the reasoning.
Yeah.
On the subject, this is just backing up a little bit, but on the subject of food and whether the fact that if food is subsidized, it gives like everyone control over what you eat. Because I feel like right at that like intersection is a place where like there's some unpacking that can be done, and where authoritarianism like comes around and bites itself in the butt. Right. Because so I lived through addiction and homelessness, and I did have to get services like that. And so, you know, supposedly I'm one of these leeches that, you know, doesn't deserve candy when I want to put a smile on my face. But like what was so lost from that conversation is that if you're forcing me to buy food because you think that, like groceries, I'm talking about groceries, because you think you're doing me a favor and protecting me from, you know, spending it all on Red Lobster or whatever. When you're homeless, you don't have anywhere to store that food. You don't have anywhere to prepare that food. And if you even get your hands on a cup of noodles and you try to sneak in and get hot water from the coffee thing at, you know, Circle K or something, even that is frowned upon. You can get, you know, popped for loitering because you were not a customer and you just, you know, were on their premises. So I hope that's something that the listener thinks about when they're fighting over what kind of food people on food stamps should be allowed to eat.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and I think a lot of that sort of ties back to this sort of moral attitude we have about poverty, you know, and also just generally speaking, the very prescriptivist attitude we have across pretty much all modes of our culture, really. Like, it's a lot of people who believe that the rules themselves are absolute and must be held absolutely, and the rules include how you're allowed to exist, you know?
Right. And I think there so needs to be like a critique or just like a thinking it through that is often like absent, partly because politicians benefit from like glossing over stuff. But like just the assumption that if there's a rule about something, then it must be there for a reason. And so we like credit that reason with benefit of the doubt. Well, not we, I suppose.
Many people
don't like to analyze it as deeply as we do. But like a lot of times it's authority trying to fix the problems that authority caused. And creating these weird like circular loops of like extra injustice.
Yeah. Well, it's like that idea of like giving the police more funding right now when what they've used it on is militarizing. And the problem right now is that the police are just paramilitary groups that are outfitted to do warfare and are doing it on citizens. Like currently, right now, in our 100 days of protests and riots, like they're doing actual warfare here. And
it's not just against Black people. And that's what people don't seem to understand. I tried to post the story about the kid in Utah with the severe autism that the police shot 10 times.
It breaks my heart. That one in particular breaks my heart more than anything else. This video comes out of this kid. He has been shot by the police, and he said, "Tell my mom I love her."
Yes.
And that's like the last thing he said.
People out there, Rachel, there were still people out there saying he shouldn't run from the cops.
and it's a child with autism. And it's like, yeah, well, I guess you deserve to die then. It's brutal. Yeah, no, it's...
Yeah, no, this was their rationale. He shouldn't have run from the cops. He must have been a danger to the public because his mother called the police. That's the rationale. And it's like, apparently you've never dealt with anybody with a severe mental illness. Just because you personally, as the mom, couldn't handle it doesn't mean that the person is so dangerous that they need to die.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Well, I would like to share a story of a thing that happened with me, actually. And this was like during my black pilling that happened over the last like 5 years of my life, really. The deepest parts of my radicalization, where I went from being, a progressive to like a full-blown radical revolutionary leftist, right? Okay. And these are like among the experiences I had. This is one of the defining ones that really changed my mind about the police in particular, and about the way that we treat 911 calls in this country. I was at a Walmart and there was a person who was catatonic in the parking lot. And when I say catatonic, I mean fit the clinical category or clinical requirements to be considered catatonic, like by the DSM, right? And this is a thing that I know just because I happen to have professional training here, right? Like another person would have just thought he was standing there non-responsive, staring off into the distance. And I noticed he had been there for like 45 minutes without moving at all. So I went to check on him. And I was just like, hey, are you okay? Can I get you anything? Are you doing all right? And he just didn't respond, right? And this is catatonia, right? It's non-responsive. It is actually it's called negative symptoms of schizophrenia, right? So this person was having a schizophrenic psychotic episode, the consequence of which was he was not able to communicate with other people, right? And that is a person who is in crisis. That is a serious mental health crisis. It's not dangerous to anyone other than the person who is in it, right? Who is standing in the middle of a Walmart parking lot surrounded by pigeons, like not moving. That part's dangerous in case somebody comes up and hurts them for existing, right? Mm-hmm. And so I called 911 for an ambulance. And they sent a cop.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was going to say. There's only one number. And then the dispatcher decides who gets sent. Police, fire.
Well, the ambulance did come, but it parked around the corner. Like I saw them park. There's like the parking lot was here. Across the street there was like a church. And then like next door to that there was a country inn. And they parked like next door down the street at the country inn. I saw them do it. And they sent the cop to come investigate instead. And this is going to blow your minds. The cop was really hostile, not just towards this person, but me specifically. When I was like, "Hey, I really think he just needs help," they were like, "You need to you need to be quiet. You need to step back. You need to like back off," basically. And I was like, standing there, like watching him, like helplessly, like, "Oh my God, did I just get this guy killed because I tried to help him?" And that was like for me such a defining moment of just like, "Oh, we can't trust any of these institutions. None of them are good, actually." Yeah. And on that lovely note of not trusting institutions and needing to change them radically, we have our special guest and man of the hour, Will Harris. Hey, Will.
Hello, everybody. That was a fun. I had to drive through the country to find a place where I could plug up a laptop computer so that I could get on here.
I did mention that broadband is a right. Internet is a right. It's a utility. I agree.
It is.
And all utilities should be free. Hi, Will.
How are you?
We're good. We're good. We've been doing a lot of talking sort of generally about like political jargon, how to infiltrate from, the left, bottom unity. What else we talked about? We talked about a lot of stuff. We talked about you pretty frequently, of course. I've talked a lot about how you and I have been friends for a very long time. How important you were to my radicalization. I've talked about some of your politics that I know, right? I know that you're, for legalization of marijuana, for example, I know that you are about empowering individuals. What did I miss, I guess, really is the question.
I'm sorry. You were asking Will. was going to say, we forgot to mention how we talked all about how underappreciated the cultural phenomenon that is Gen X.
Yes.
Was so.
Which means a lot to me and Will, the millennials.
Right. Well, of course, it's all about you, just like it always is. Marsha.
No, there's Cindy. Remember? There's Cindy.
Yeah, we're the
that's
babies.
right. Cindy.
But I also did ask why William. Hi, William. I'm Leslie. Why are you a libertarian and not Green Party?
So I identify as a libertarian, and you know, to be honest, the Greens are very libertarian as well. Whenever we use the term libertarian, a lot of times we use it within kind of like the original meaning, which is just an alternative for anarchist. It's just that, you know, anarchists kind of got a bad rap. After a few of them started throwing bombs for labor rights, they started to become synonymous with bomb throwers. And so it was illegal to be an anarchist for a while there. And so we just use the term libertarian. And I know Mike is real big on this as well. It's where in this country, we're really trying to reclaim the title back. It's our word to begin with. We're trying to take our word back, and internationally, it's our word to begin with. And it's also just a great segue, right? Because whenever people talk about socialism, it's always, oh, that's just when the government owns everything, right? And it's like, well, I'm a socialist, but I'm advocating for a commune-based bottom-up democracy that doesn't need a state. And so that's why I would describe myself as a libertarian. I think most of it's just trying to reappropriate the term.
Yeah, I mean, that's valid for sure. So let's talk a little bit about your district. And then I want to circle back around and talk about, you know, how you plan on incorporating your sort of ideological background into your campaign and into, you know, if you win your term serving as a representative.
Okay.
So first of all, tell us about your district.
So my district is Fayette County, Spalding County, and Henry counties. It's south of Atlanta for everybody else there. The claim to fames here are involved, like Fayette County being where Pinewood Studios is, to where they produce the most blockbusters in the country. All the Marvel movies are filmed here in this area. The Walking Dead's filmed here. So that's kind of like everybody's already seen my district without knowing it. You just see my district, you know, as a zombie infested kind of area, which is kind of cool, I guess. It's a relatively smaller district. Only have one major town in it. I feel like most people watching this stream probably would consider it like a little hamlet. You know, it's relatively small, but it works out in our favor, right? Because whenever you have smaller communities, you have kind of stronger communal bonds, which is great. A big thing about the district in general is that we may get our first big industry, which is the first casino of Georgia, right? They've been talking about this for a long time. And then another interesting thing is that this district is gerrymandered to include the county prison. And actually, if you pull up my district, it's kind of like this blob, and then it goes out of its way to add just a little bitty sliver. And the only thing there is a prison, right? I just think that's interesting because I'm definitely pro voter rights for people incarcerated.
Yeah. Well, and everybody who watches the show regularly knows that I'm just a prison abolitionist altogether. So I'm like, heck yeah.
You're more radical on that than I am, actually.
Yeah, I know I am. I know. But I mean, I believe in the sort of fundamental goodness of people. And I believe in the ability to like heal people that have hurt other people and heal things, you know, collaboratively. It is a big, complicated thing that we do not have time for right now, but maybe someday. Maybe someday I'll talk about it. So your district, it's a cool place, awesome, full of people who are just like you, right?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so. So tell me about the people there.
So our congressional district is actually considered one of the most conservative congressional districts in the entire country. That's the Georgia 3rd by Drew Ferguson, which was really interesting to me whenever, I started running for this position mostly because I came across information that said there's nobody running for this position. It's likely to flip, if there's somebody running who can put in the work. And I even, told them, well, hey, I'm a libertarian, I'm more anarchist. They're cool with it, great, yeah. Right? So it's like I got their permission in that regard. But I'm sorry. My son kind of distracted me there. Could you remind me of the question?
Yeah, of course. Well, I was kind of cracking a joke because I know that your district is very conservative, and that you have a very conservative background yourself, and also that, you yourself were eventually radicalized to the left. And so, I'm giving you an opportunity to talk about how you might sell yourself to these people who are so much more conservative than,
Okay, great. Well, you guys probably spoke about this a lot earlier with bottom unity. And so whenever we talk about things like bottom unity, I don't mean to disparage the right side of the spectrum, but we often call them misguided mutualists, right? To where it's like once we get into the nit and grit, we find out that true right libertarians are actually left libertarians. They just don't know it yet. And so in that regard, and just in general as well, I feel like anarchists always serve as this bridge between pro-state forces of the left and kind of more conservative elements, just because we share a lot of the same kind of things that conservatives do, right? Where it's like we seek self-sufficient communities. We socialism isn't like, oh, let's expand a welfare state, right? It's more about let's ensure that we can take care of our neighbors in our community through mutual aid. And so we share a lot of things already with conservative voters. Key among these things, especially in the state of Georgia, is how pro-gun we are. I'm very pro-gun. I'm armed. I believe that people deserve the right to self-defense, especially people of color, more marginalized groups. It needs to be easier, especially for our Black community, to get firearms. They're the lowest, the least armed demographic in the country. And so, I definitely support gun rights. I support self-sufficiency. And these are things that kind of bridge us on the left to people who I believe are being misguided into conservative ideology. Like, I honestly believe that if everybody sat down with an open mind and thought about what they were doing, would all arrive at the same conclusion, which is what we're all striving for right now.
Right.
So I have to ask the question or pose it with, I agree with you that Blacks are the least armed demographic, but one of my reasoning being is because I don't trust to get a fair trial if I ever try to defend myself, ever. And you don't know this about me. I am currently sporting a broken shoulder from a police officer from 3 years ago that I cannot get any help with. I've talked to lawyers, and every single one of them have said, yes, your rights were violated. Yes, you were assaulted. It was even worse because it was done in front of my children. And I went to jail for 78 hours on a BS charge that was thrown out as soon as the judge saw it. I got lucky, but many people do not. And I wouldn't feel comfortable carrying a weapon because if I ever needed to use it, I feel like I'd either be killed or I'd be thrown into the jail for defending myself.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I'm privileged enough to where I am able to remain armed. And, there's a big reason why stuff like this happens, right? Because like pretty much every single gun law that's written in this country is made specifically to target our Black communities. I want to say I understand why the Black community is the least armed, but I know I can't fully understand it. But I agree with you. I understand exactly what you mean, because I do a lot of advocacy groups, especially with my own friends for hey, if you have any questions, especially with how uncertain things are, if you just have any questions about firearms, or if you just kind of want me to run you through things, that's something that we can definitely do. And I definitely, have friends of color who come to me and they definitely bring this up. And, it's nothing new to me that, I definitely have privilege with firearms. Absolutely. And we're actually just now starting like a sub-chapter of Socialist Rifle Association for a little section of Atlanta. We just ratified through convention, and we're submitting it now. But out of like our 5 leadership positions, it's great that 3 of the 5 leadership positions are from people of color. And so
you're not even on it.
Nice.
Oh yeah, I'm not even on the leadership council or committee. Sorry. And I try to be very understanding of what you just said. Again, it's not anything I can fully understand myself because I can't experience it. But it is something that I hope that I'm actively advocating for. I definitely want everybody to be able to responsibly arm for self-defense without fearing for their own lives, just for this what I would consider just basic human right. Like everybody has the right to be able to defend themselves, because if you don't have that right, then you don't really have too much of a life, right?
Well, I definitely don't think it's a coincidence that gun control legislation was first introduced after the Black Panthers got guns.
Oh yeah.
I don't think that's a coincidence in particular.
Actually, if you go to my Facebook group, you'll actually, not my Facebook group, my Facebook page, you'll see me, somebody was like, oh, how can you run like this and have a gun, and own a gun? And I actually referenced that exact same Ronald Reagan quote to argue with this individual, because Republicans are great for gun control laws. It's just that they don't target white men, which are also the number one source of gun violence, right?
Yeah, well, we were talking about this earlier, actually. Sort of the core drive of the Republican ego is about power. And it's about hierarchy and having your place in the hierarchy. And, that place being one of entitlement to power, to control, and to dictating what people who are below you may or may not do. And I think, that power dynamic, especially in our culture, is frequently at the end of a gun. It is at the end of the police and their guns, or it is at the end of a 17-year-old and his gun, or it is, at the end of the gun in the hand of one of the members of our military overseas killing brown kids for oil. It is this constant thing where we have used guns and violence to uphold these very rigid, patriarchal, white supremacist, misogynist, chauvinist hierarchies. And it's bad, actually. And I think putting a gun in someone else's hand changes the power dynamic in a way.
Absolutely. Just to kind of go off of this, right, to where we really see, it's like, it's not necessarily a political power, comes from a gun kind of scenario or anything like that, but we definitely see kind of more leftist movements and human rights movements also being tied to the accessibility of weaponry and ease of use, right? And so it's like, for the vast majority of human existence, it was my well-armed, well-trained, and professional knights can beat up your peasants.
Yes.
Your knights. And so whenever a knight is a person who's a walking tank and there's nothing that you can do about it, then whoever has the most knights has the most power. And then, then we start to see firearms come in, and this is whenever we start to see just absolute revolutions, entire armies fall, not armies, but empires fall and collapse. And it's because it democratized violence, right? Because for the longest time, if a king wanted you dead, he could get you dead just because he wanted you dead.
Yeah, just because. Yeah.
And so now we're starting to get into this point to where, I hate to frame it this way, but it's just like a child could change the course of humanity by having access to a firearm, and it's
well, and I mean, it happens, right? That's what school shootings are about. When you have like 17-year-olds doing mass murder, like those are kids. 17-year-olds are children, like they're older children, but they're kids.
I do want to preface here towards essentially, I long for a world where we don't need weapons,
Yeah, right. Of course. I agree. Like if it were up to me, all guns would be thrown into the pits of Mordor and we would never use them again. But so long as they exist, probably white dudes with money are not the only ones who should have them.
Yeah. Well, and kind of looping back to a little bit about my district is like it's a little bit further south in my district. So, but it's neighboring districts. It's where after the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, they came down to Noonan, Georgia. The neo-Nazis were present in Noonan. Leftists showed up. The police pointed their guns at one side, and it wasn't the Nazi side. Afterwards, the Nazis went down to Pine Mountain, in which case they burned swastikas and crosses. And then just another interesting thing is that the school district that's in my district was employing a high school teacher who attended the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. They found him, and then they fired him. But it turns out that he was probably radicalizing students. They think that there were 2 students that he radicalized into neo-Nazi fascist ideology.
God, that's dark. That's grim. They talk about like the college professors turning people into Marxists, but
get them while they're in high school.
Yeah, well, I mean that's kind of what the military does, right? Like,
oh yeah, absolutely. Because it's like for a time there, I had a 16-year-old living in my house as well. I can't tell you just how many text messages we get as his presumed parents or his guardian contacts, and then how many mailers we get to where it's just essentially, hey, Vaden, 17 years old, join the Air Force. It's cool.
Yeah, right.
So luckily that's not in my domain unless if the United States collapses, in which case I'm elected to the legislative of a new country of Georgia.
Yes. Well, so I think we have sufficiently assuaged, your constituents' fear that you'll take their guns. But like, what will you give them? What are some things you want to change that will immediately improve the material conditions?
So I'm definitely in favor of $15 minimum wage. I will say that $15 an hour minimum wage is not nearly enough right now. It was $15 an hour minimum wage 10 years ago. It's probably closer to 22 now, I believe is what most economists say. I'm also in favor of, I love to look at other states to see what they're doing and find these kind of policies that aren't really talked about a lot. Well, I guess I'm claiming this one, but it kind of, Trump has recently started to go along with this policy as well. But as a state, we need to cap insulin prices per month. This seems to be a bipartisan issue now. It did enter mainstream a whole lot more since whenever I made my website to whenever until now. Probably one of the biggest things though is that we're just going to try to decriminalize drug schedules in the state of Georgia, right? Because it's like, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but it's something like 30,000 Georgians are arrested every year for marijuana alone. Every marijuana arrest costs the state at least $4,000. And if it's a felony conviction, it's going to cost like $72,000. And for what? And this kind of
also disproportionately affecting communities of color, Black people.
Yeah, I was gonna
directly destroying your community. Yeah,
because it ties back to the gun laws, right? It's like I used to not be kind of a libertarian. I used to not be an anarchist, but I started to kind of like research it more, right? And so then whenever you start to research it more, you start to realize that things like laws are only made just to further oppress groups of people. Laws can never be uniformly just, right? And so it's kind of like a speeding ticket. Fundamentally, it's just a tax, right? Marijuana laws, yes, they're enforced against the white community, but if we're being completely honest, it's not. It's probably only enforced against the white community in situations to where it's just like the officer needs to do it or has a desire to do it. But I've heard of situations.
Like how the police.
Sorry, you can go.
It's like how the police let Kyle Rittenhouse go until the next morning when the videos were everywhere and everybody saw the police letting him go.
Yeah. Well, you hear stories all the time of white people being pulled over by police and then they're caught with marijuana, and it's just like, hey, hide it better. And it's just like, I kind of like live in the suburbs, and kind of where, you know, my district is, I don't believe there's even a police force. I believe, like, just kind of describe how my district is. It's just straight sheriff.
Just like the one?
No, it was 3
deputies, right?
But yeah, so I mean, but those are some things that I'm hoping that we can immediately bring to change material conditions of people, and that's really what I'm about, right? Because it's obvious that the government is here to enrich a certain class of people, when we could just be reallocating those exact same resources to more people-friendly programs, you know?
Right. Like for the same amount of money that we're using to buy like a single bulletproof vest, we could be providing about 1,500 pounds of food to the community. Like,
well, you know, so, my favorite statistic with the whole defund the police discussion is that, you know, for every $1 that we spend on inmate education, we get $7 back.
Right.
It's the greatest social investment that we can ever make as a society, in terms of like monetary return on investment, right? And so whenever we say defund the police, what we mean is, why don't we just spend that $1 before the person has to go to jail?
Right.
You know? And it's almost that simple, really.
Yeah.
Well, and like we were talking about earlier about, you know, when we call for help, the dispatch is a police dispatch, and then they decide who gets sent. And I think that needs to be separated so that dispatch isn't connected to the police department. And then when you call the 911, they really do allocate it to the correct person for the response, as opposed to that being a branch of the police department. Or am I crazy?
Right. That sounds great, right? And it's like, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with like the Rojava model, but it's there's pretty much a council upon council upon council that you have to go through, for if you want to take kind of like a injury claim, or like if you need what we would call like a police action, right? And it's like one of these committees that you would come across in these smaller communes are basically councils of grandmothers, right? Because it's like, if you're going to listen to somebody, if like somebody can bring law and order to a neighborhood, it's going to be the elderly grandmothers, right? The community. And so like in Rojava, this is something that they have. If you're having beef with your neighbor, you go to this little house to where there's this council of grandmothers. You both present your cases, and they help kind of negotiate the sides and give their opinions. And if that doesn't work, then we escalate it, right? That's a little bit community centric. Your idea is definitely a whole lot easier to implement, because it's like we could just train at the point of 911, right? But
right.
This is also like an issue of theory versus praxis, right?
Right. Well, and of police unions, right, which have a huge amount of influence on politics, which is a huge part of why saying defund the police is so unpopular in mainstream sort of political discourse, right? Because the police unions have a lot of bargaining power and control a lot of votes, and obviously do not want the police to be defunded at all, right? and there's a lot to be said for like police shouldn't have a union or whatever, but that's just because I'm very anti-cops, and that's not like a real job. It's just thuggery for money. But other than that, like there's this huge amount of power behind it, right? And so I think the fact that this is starting to be part of the conversation is very good. I'm very happy and excited to see politicians like you, Will, who are entering into the discourse and saying like, hey, we can do better things with this money. Like, it's not just about like, oh, we hate the cops. It's about the cops should be redundant by now. Why do we have this vestigial organ of violent, community oppression and punishment when we know from the science that punishment doesn't help, when we know from the statistics that actually the best way to prevent crime is to just make sure people have enough, when we know from years and years and centuries of observation of taking these like actual measurements of looking at the way people function, that actually the best thing you can do is encourage them to grow, and punishing people doesn't help. And why are we still using this 200-year-old machine to solve these problems when we can do so much better?
I was just going to say, how about we don't use the model of the police department that was brought about because of runaway slaves in 2020? I don't know.
Yeah.
I found an interesting statistic about all of that as well, right? Because dog use in police departments is more heavily used in the South because of this reason, right?
Dogs.
And I don't remember the exact city this is in, so it's entirely hearsay, but it's one of the major ones. It's kind of like a St. Louis size city. But whenever you look through the statistics, there's only one racial demographic that gets dog attacks, right?
What are you talking about? The story that just happened recently?
It might have happened recently. It might have been.
There was one, and I can't remember off the top of my head where it was, but the officer he's been fired or suspended, but no charges have been brought. And because there was a black man who was handcuffed, and he sicked his police dog on a handcuffed.
This statistics for an entire police department. It's like the total canine use for this particular police department. I would have to find it. I don't have an exact citation right now. So people who want to fact check me, just take it as hearsay. You can disprove it by saying I don't believe it.
Well, okay. And William, I'm going to kind of hold your feet to the fire as a politician, because you happen to be a politician and you're here. But the tactics, the tactics that are being used, if nothing else, okay, if we do nothing else, how do we get the police training to not do things like hog tie a woman in the back of a police car and make her call the police officer master for 20 minutes? How do we stop that? Yeah, that was just a recent news story that happened yesterday.
I haven't even heard that. Jesus Christ.
Face down in the back of a police car, hog tied, and they forced her to call him master for 20 minutes and things like that. And even when we see
that's a hate crime.
But even when we see these things on video, we're still saying, oh, but it's police training and it's no big deal. How do we stop that nonsense?
So yeah. So you can, as a state, we can make sure that they don't have any kind of immunity for their actions whatsoever. I feel like that's an important step, because then we can start to seek financial compensation. But financial compensation doesn't really work on this, right? One of my favorite suggestions that I've ever seen for this topic, and I don't necessarily think you could do this at a state level that I'm running for, but we could at least talk about it, right? To where whenever we hear these stories about, the city reached a $12 million settlement with the family, right? The $12 million coming out of bank loan that the city's going to make, that the taxpayers are paying for, and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, what's the point? There's no kind of, I don't seek punishment, but at the very least, there's no equitable justice in that situation. How could you make it more equitable? That $12 million comes out of that city's police pension fund. If you start to tie their actual retirement, if you start to tie their material well-being to how performative their neighboring cops are doing. And it's not even like, oh, you're a great cop. You got X number of tickets this week, right? In this situation, good cop just means you didn't kill somebody, right? And so it's like, as long as you kind of have that scenario to where it's like, if this cop over here is going out of his way to brutalize people, but it's harming my retirement because now that settlement has to come out of my pension, then I'm going to be more invested into stopping.
See, go ahead. I was going to say, I totally agree.
It's just the greatest kind of thing that I've encountered with that particular question. It really stuck with me, and it makes sense, right? The taxpayers are paying into the pension system, and is it legal?
It doesn't make people that aren't. I mean, it doesn't make people that aren't responsible for what happens afterwards. Like, okay, so what I'm going through right now with my broken shoulder from a cop, I have a GoFundMe that my best friend started for me. I don't post it anywhere. I don't want to. I don't want random strangers to pay for my shoulder. They shouldn't. They didn't do this to me. They shouldn't. I shouldn't have to ask random strangers in the midst of a pandemic where everybody's hurting for money and say, hey, could you randomly, reach in your pocket because I need $25,000 to fix my shoulder and for rehabilitation. No, what should happen is the police department of the police officer that did this should pay for it. Absolutely. It's their fault.
Well, and that's the big problem with qualified immunity. And I mean, like, big excitement. William Harris said end qualified immunity. That's a good thing. Yeah,
I wish I was in Georgia. I'd vote for you.
But I'm going to let you guys kind of pick my brain for maybe like one more question or so.
Yeah, I know you got to get going. We are wrapping at the end of 2 hours. We might have a quick special appearance by Ted Terry. He should be here any minute. So we'll probably chat with him for a little bit after you're gone. But while we still have you, Will, why should you be president of the United States?
Because I don't know. I just feel like I wouldn't even live in the White House.
You would abolish the office of
it would be like the president of, I think it's Paraguay or Uruguay, to where he won the presidency and he just like lives in his like shed.
Nice.
I have a question.
Yes.
This isn't really directly on policy per se, but it does echo back to something we talked about earlier. Like the human side of this, how are you finding that your message resonates with audiences in a conservative district? And what kind of bridges are you finding are helpful that they can successfully cross? Like, what is that looking like for you?
That is such a good question.
That is a good question. Yeah. I don't use S words or C words through my campaign literature, right? I definitely come at this by just saying that I'm a left libertarian. And if somebody asks what that means, is that, I'm kind of like a libertarian, but I kind of like a bunch of like the stuff that the Democrats are doing. That's how I describe it. That's just the simplest way that I can describe, kind of our ideology. Because I know that if we're going to use the S or the C word, then I'm going to have to take an hour just to explain this to somebody, and they still may not even get it, right? Because we're so conditioned on this. But honestly, just calling myself a libertarian is great. If you look at my Facebook ads, I'll send you the picture. I'm holding a chicken. I have a rifle on my back. I'm wearing kind of like a more farm-oriented shirt, and while I'm standing in a chicken coop that I made by hand, right?
You look like a Portland liberal, by the way, in that picture.
Oh, I'll believe it. Went to Marshall's, and that's what they had.
You look like you were trained at a Marxist super soldier camp.
Yeah, nothing says Marxist super soldier like having a chicken.
The chicken is the Marxist super soldier.
Oh, think about that. Chicken warriors.
I will admit that. Okay, well, I'll loop back to this. But I feel like just coming, like on my Facebook ads, I say I'm a small government pro-gun Democrat, and if that doesn't make sense, click my link and it'll take you to my website. Mike, I know I sent you kind of just that thing because I knew you would like that, to where I had somebody say, I'm a libertarian. And I said, cool, me too. And he said, I support libertarians. And so it's important that I'm on the fence about electoralism in general, right? Especially being in the system. There's a lot of things that are published in my name that I never said, right? And so it's not like off the wall things or anything like that, but I can understand kind of like the mechanisms of this process. And so just from the mechanisms of this process, whenever I'm able to really get down to like the grit of what I'm trying to do, I'm really trying to kind of get us talking about what the left actually means, right? Because a lot of people don't know that libertarians can be socialists. I have so many people who are like, that's contradictory. How is that possible? And then it allows us to talk about it, right? One thing I'm really great at doing is actually talking with people. I can convince anybody of almost anything, right? Because the secret isn't that you start from where you're at, you start from where they're at.
Right.
And one thing that we share a lot with our, conservative neighbors are things that like we can come up and we can, as libertarian socialists, we can come up and just say, hey, it's kind of sucky how the people who don't do the work get paid. They get money out of it. It's like, I think we should have an economy where it's like the people who do the work are the people who own the business. And then everybody's kind of a small business owner, right? So I don't use any scary words. I don't use communism, socialism, worker, cooperative, but that's what I described, right? I described.
It blows my mind that worker is a trigger word at this point too. Like person who does work, oh no.
That's like how your mom suggested use wage earner instead.
Yeah. Well, and my mom has a whole PR background. There's a reason I'm here, y'all. It's hereditary. I'm sorry. Like this is a heritable. This is how power works in the United States. I'm doing my best to undo it with what I have, right? But my mom loves to weigh in on like our messaging, like for me and for Will, and tell us like, okay, well, here's how it's going to sound to these people, and it's like the kinds of things that are like so seemingly innocuous that will like trigger boomers to.
I can honestly say, William, while you were talking about being a libertarian, until your description of what did you say? Now I can't remember exactly what you said, but you said something about, I think like the Democrats, but I believe in gun ownership and something else. I can't remember what it was you said.
So that was two different things. And so how I describe kind of like libertarian socialism is kind of like, think about how the libertarians are, but it's kind of like, we like a lot of the ideas that the Democrats have.
Okay, not that. The thing that you said after that.
Okay, so the next thing was like my Facebook advertisement to where I'm a pro-gun, small government Democrat.
That's it. Until you got there, I didn't know what the hell you were talking about.
There we go. Yeah.
I still didn't know what you meant by libertarian for yourself. Until you said that, I was sitting back on, I still don't know what the freaking hell you're talking about.
That is so funny because now I'm going, that's an oxymoron.
That's the thing about messaging, right? You got to meet people where they are. And right now we have Will here. Will, thank you so much for being with us.
No problem.
Obviously, I think you rule. We've been friends for like going on 15 years.
I have to finish my one story though, because we were talking about my chickens. And if you know my marketing, I'm holding a chicken, right? Because Vermin Supreme showed us this, right? There's the
Supreme rules.
And so I don't name my chickens, and the reason why I know that they're my chickens is that I named one chicken Queen Bee. She was the largest hen. And so then the day that I moved Queen Bee and all of the other hens out to the coop, I go out there and one of them had been pegged to death, unfortunately. Which one was it? Queen Bee. And so I'm confident that my chickens are just as socialist as I am.
They don't need human names forced upon them.
Should have never named them. I don't name them now. I should have never named one queen, and I have learned from my mistake.
It's your fault. They overthrew.
They did.
You created this artificial hierarchy, and they overthrew it because even the most base of animals understands that having power over somebody else is horse shit. Or chicken shit, I guess.
Be careful. You might be next.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
But I do appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me. Unfortunately, I'm really busy. I'm a single father. I am a solo father. Not that there's anything wrong with single fathers, but I always have to clarify that. I'm a solo father because my wife has to work nights, because we're a working class family. I'm actually going to get a pay cut, a very substantial pay cut if I win this election. I have no material gains from this election. Yeah. I do appreciate the monetary donations. It helps me win. My opponent, I'm not sure if you talked about my opponent. She's a champion of the Georgia Heartbeat bill. She has like 3 positions that she wants to advocate for. Traditional family values, which we know what that means. She wants to advocate a pro-life agenda, which again, no surprise there. And then she wants to protect Second Amendment rights. So obviously we agree on one thing, but we definitely disagree on the other 2 things. So that's the person that I'm running against. She has 3 times the amount of cash on hand that I do. Excuse me. I am sorry. But I appreciate everything. And just kind of going back to describing what libertarian socialism is, and just one thing I do want to leave off on here is that if it was difficult, or not necessarily difficult, but if you didn't quite understand what I was until that moment, imagine how it is for Mike, right? Because Mike is active in like the libertarian spaces. And if there's definitely like there's one thing to be a left evangelical in leftist groups or liberal groups and stuff like that, but it's a completely different thing to do this in libertarian spaces. And so, yeah, it's difficult, but again, we're trying to reclaim that term. So even if you hear somebody say anarchist, you can just call them a libertarian if you really want to disrupt their day a little bit.
I definitely know there's a lot of leftists who very aggressively believe that you cannot be a libertarian socialist and that is an oxymoron, and they don't know what they're talking about. Generally speaking,
to talk about it, right? Like there's nothing that will let you, because if you go to a conservative and you're just like, hi, I'm a socialist, they're just going to immediately draw everything about you, and then you don't need to talk to them anymore because they already know everything about what you're about to tell them. Most of it's just going to be lies, right? Lies. But whenever you come up and you're just like, oh, I'm a libertarian, socialist, what? Right? How is that possible? And then you get to talk about how, we want worker cooperatives. We believe that, let's get rid of standing armies in favor of militia structures, democratically elected militia structures. Let's kind of make committees that do this kind of stuff. Because I feel like with almost every single problem, there's some kind of libertarian response to it, right? It's like, how do we solve people who need transient lifestyles, who need to rent houses, right? Well, you can make a cooperative, right? You pay into the cooperative, you get a house. If you live in your house to the point where the amount that you paid into with the cooperative pay off the house, and you own the house now because you've lived there for too long, right? There are solutions. It takes a lot of work, though, and I know that it's not practical in our current environment, which is why William Harris, the anarchist, is different from William Harris, the politician. William Harris, the anarchist, has very ambitious goals. William Harris, the politician, is in a situation to where we can't really accomplish a lot of these goals because there's a lot of work that we still have to do, right?
What's so funny as you're talking is that like I know that like when we talk about a democratically run militia or a cooperative, like essentially what you're trying to talk people into is like a series of meetings and people familiar with left organizing, because they hear this bomb throwing anarchist thing, but like actually we're like really into, I'm not going to say we're into bureaucracy per se, but like that's how that happens. Meeting, basically democratic society is a bunch of meetings where you get to actually participate in decisions that affect you. But like at the bottom line, we're saying, who would like your political life to just turn into a series of meetings, which is a lot less threatening, but in a way it doesn't actually sound as glamorous. So I think there's a trade-off there, but that was funny when you were talking. I thought, oh my gosh, what have I got myself into?
Well, it looks like we might have lost Will a little bit there, but decent timing for it. Will, thank you for being here. I'm going to drop you from the stream. One more time, that was Will Harris running for Georgia 73. He's great. He's been a friend of mine for a very long time. I completely endorse him as a person. His actual platform policies are not quite as ambitious, as he was saying, as his personal ideologies, but he has a great platform really based around worker empowerment and worker rights, based around individual liberties, and based around really just maximizing the relationship that we have with each other, not with the government as such. If you would like to give him some money, if you have some money to spare, I know times are tough for everybody. His Act Blue can be reached at tiny.cc nsfwill, and that is going to take you to his Act Blue page. You can give him like even just like $1, $5, like everything adds up, especially in small races like this where the price tags are lower to begin with. You can make a huge difference with a pretty small donation.
Or a big donation.
Or a big donation. Yeah. If you have lots of money, please, by all means, give Will lots of money. I promise you cannot give it to a better candidate. He will really go out and fight for people in Georgia, especially if you are outside of the South. If you are in a more securely blue area, there are a lot of people you can help a whole lot with not nearly as much as you might need to spend to have the same amount of impact in a wealthier place, in a blue place, in a place that is not run by Brian Kemp, our illegitimate child king. It's not great. It's bad here. We could use the help. So if you have it, please send it over. That's tiny.cc/nsfwill. The NSFW are uppercase because of course they are, and the rest of it is lowercase. And that's pretty much all I've got for y'all. Unfortunately, it looks like we were not able to get Ted on today. We had some scheduling snafus, but we'll have him on at different times. Everybody can talk to Ted Terry, who is also great. I'll give him a little shout out at the end here. He is the former mayor of Clarkson, soon to be commissioner of DeKalb County. Incredibly diverse area, incredibly cool things happening in this area. A lot of really amazing candidates are coming up from the ground here. He's going to be great to talk to, and he's a bigwig in the Georgia Democratic Party, so we can talk a little bit about what they're doing next time. For now, thanks for being here with us for 2 whole hours. That was super long. I have Mike Shipley. He is chair of the Libertarian Socialist Caucus of the Libertarian Party and a swell dude. And we have Leslie, who is fabulous, who is wonderful, who is here all the time, and also who will be here again later tonight at 8 o'clock, was it?
8 o'clock. And don't forget, please go to Amazon and buy my book, Forgotten Tomorrow, Crazy Todays, available on Amazon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you full screen real quick. Hold on. Pop that up there.
There we go.
That. Fabulous. All right. And Mike, do you want to plug anything before we go?
Just follow me on Twitter at Mikester. If you want to follow the LibSoc Caucus on Twitter, it's at LibSoc Caucus. Actually, I will just say, operating in the Libertarian Party is obviously pretty exhausting. And we still are a small minority. So there's a huge tactical benefit in sort of like expanding our influence in that party because it is a ballot access party. So that might actually be an easier project than overtaking the Democratic Party. So there is that. But like I said, we're exhausted and we're surrounded by right-wing special people who need a lot of education. So we need reinforcements is my point. So if you have the patience for that work, reach out to me. I will get you plugged in, or just find them on Facebook and get involved. I promise you it's actually fun in an interesting kind of way. So, yeah.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Libertarian Party is about 600,000 people?
Yeah.
Right?
So
Yeah. So
registered voter wise, actually, like card carrying member is, is smaller than that because people willing to register to vote is much more than people willing to like get a card and like go to meetings and stuff. But on that note, it's pretty easy to get together some comrades and be. I don't want to use the word takeover, but I mean, what else am I talking about? Your local county party structure or just established one. A lot of counties don't even have that much structure yet. So,
yeah. Well, listen, if DSA can put together 100,000 members, which is their current push, I'm sure we can put some of those people towards taking over the Libertarian Party, and maybe then we'll just have ballot access. Maybe we have it then.
Yeah.
There's no reason to believe that like democratic socialism can't also be libertarian, right? We like liberties. We're about maximizing individual liberties with the, democratic process. That's why we're democratic socialists. So like, whatever, let's do that.
Absolutely.
Let's take over the Libertarian Party instead.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like achievable goals. And I don't think taking over the Democratic Party is among them. But hey, we'll find out, right? Who knows? Trump could die. He could die of COVID in like 5 days. It would rule. It would be so great. So, wish Trump death. Don't wish Trump death. Do you wish Trump death?
No, I don't wish
death.
Yeah, I wish for poetic justice, whatever that means to you. And give Will money. Don't give the show money today. Today, give the money to Will. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Inshallah, as Mike just said. And mashallah that we are here.
Everybody come back at 8.
Come back at 8. We'll see you next time, everybody. My child is screaming bye-bye from the other side of the door. This is a live show, folks. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.